Good morning, United Kingdom. Good morning, and good morning to everyone this Monday morning, the 16th of August, middle of the month. The year has flown by just like 2000 itself with the COVID and lockdown. This year has been full of lots of ups and downs. So the saying of today, or the saying of the week is it the saying of the week? That's right. The saying of the week is, I'll say that again. Good morning to everyone to the drive time live session with Lakhi Singh, the property fixer. And we're going to start again. Good morning, 16th of August, special day, mid of the month, 2021. And the saying of the week, a surplus of effort can offset a deficit of confidence. That's right, that was the saying. So if you, I think the rough meaning of it means is, if you've got a lack of confidence, so you're suffering from some form of anxiety or neurosis about yourself, being inferior, hard work, that's the key. Do a bit of hard work to overcome anything that you find makes you feel as if you're not good enough, or you have a deficit of confidence in yourself. So I think a lovely bit of advice there for most people. And I think that normally works. Normally, success is about hard work. Success is about confidence, but it's also about consistency and what's the other thing? Consistent. I'm a bit slow this morning. Let me just say that again. It's about being consistent. That's right. Consistent and persistent. That's what it is. That's right. So in cases of people who haven't got that confidence, they have a deficit of confidence, hard work, the extra effort can always counter that. That's what the saying means, I think. And we'll have whoever we call on. We've got a guest today by the name of Mr. Is it Steve? Right, okay. We've got Michael Griffiths, who's going to be called on in a bit. He's one of our guests. We're waiting for Lakhi Singh, obviously, to get ready backstage, and we will invite him in a bit. So, can someone become a multi-millionaire from buying properties from LPA receivers? Is that right? Okay, so I think the question revolves around what LPA receivers are. So what are LPA receivers? We want to know. And then if we understand what LPA receivers are, then we want to know what is the rights or the powers of an LPA receiver. Where do they come from? And then we're going to want to know, if we know what an LPA receiver is, we know what their powers are, how can we interact with an LPA receiver for us to become millionaires? Important question. An important one and a very crucial one for people who want to be successful or buy properties, assets directly from the receivers. And sometimes it can be daunting. People think these receivers are like receivers in trust. So the type of receivers you have when you're in a bankruptcy trust. Those type of receivers are slightly more aggressive, more technical. They have powers that also come from some area of law, but their job is designed differently. But the powers, nevertheless, is what they exercise. So without further ado, we'll have our guest on. I don't think it's Lakhi backstage. Lakhi Singh. So let's get Lakhi Singh on first. Lakhi, good morning. Good morning to Lakhi Singh this morning on the drive. Lakhi Singh, the property fixer and the drive time live session. And Lakhi Singh, good morning. You're working. I think you're walking to work, aren't you?
I'm actually in the garden.
You're in the garden, so you're not going to work. I like that. Lakhi Singh's made it, doesn't need to go to work. So, Lakhi Singh, you're living it up in the garden. I hope that's not permanent, just for exercise. So, yeah, tell us, what do you say about a bit of extra effort? You know, an extra bit of effort can offset the deficit in confidence. Is that true as a statement? Are you naturally a confident person, or have you had to work hard sometimes to offset your confidence?
That's quite a good question. I think everybody's probably got to put some effort in because confidence is relative, isn't it? So your level of confidence is relative based upon your own perception of your confidence. So I suppose one can never be too confident, can they?
Yes, but the topic is now there's people at that scale of the scale of confidence that need to work extra hard to offset confidence because it's obvious that their confidence is being hindered and they need to get the results, and so they feel they're working extra hard. And you got to take that into context. People work hard, and then people work extra hard. Are you work hard, or are you work extra hard person?
I think I'm probably a bit work hard, but a bit of confident. But if I was a lot more confident, then maybe things would be a bit different.
Right. Okay. So we've got. What's the weather like there? First, tell us.
It's probably about 16 degrees today. It's not
16. That's not good. That's right. Not too hot, not too cold. We're like Mother Bear. Yeah.
That's what.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to call in our guest now, Lakhi Singh, Mr. Steve Griffiths. Griffith, that's right. The younger brother of Steve. Let's get him on. Let's see what he's got to say for himself. Morning, Steve. Michael.
Hello.
Sorry about
Good morning.
I'll get it right. I'll get it right the fifth time. Don't worry. So, Michael, what part of the United Kingdom are you at, sir?
Royston, which is in Hertfordshire. So we are just sort of north of London.
Just outside the M25, is that right?
Yeah, bit north of that, but yeah.
Bit north of that. What's the place? Say that again.
Royston in Hertfordshire.
Royston, right? Okay, so Royston, if I'm not wrong, is that just off the A11 somewhere? Is it?
Off the A10.
A10. Sorry, yes, A10. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so that's a bit out in the sticks, but lovely country area. So I assume either you're doing something in that area, like you're working in an industrial park that does special type of tables and chairs, or you shuttle into town every day. Well, which one is it?
Well, I personally, I work from home, so I'm a business coach. I help all sorts of different people, but my specialty is time management.
Excellente.
To help people avoid overwhelm and exhaustion and things like that. So that's my
speciality. Have you done a special course for this, Michael?
Well, I do have project management qualifications, but to be honest, most project management qualifications are not really worth the paper they're written on. They are mostly nonsense. It is mostly experience, really, that I rely upon. I've worked in a variety of different industries, and I've worked with lots of different people. I used to run a web development company before I had a stroke, so I've been about a bit, you know. So it's mostly experience that I draw upon.
Experience. Well, that's interesting, because a lot of the web development or IT, they use their own management tools, but the management tools don't really register exhaustion or quality of the staff's attention and stuff, because they're just based on trigger times, aren't they? You've got a snag, you've got to resolve it in a certain number of seconds or minutes, and if you're not doing it in time, you're not getting back, not fixing the snag, then it affects your KPI. So it's a bit robotic, isn't it, really?
It is. It's too robotic for people. It doesn't,
exactly,
as you say, it doesn't account for the people in the process, and they are the most.
Is that one of your motivators? Is that one of the reasons you started to get into the actual time management of people and try to get them to manage their work in a way? Because I know in the IT sector, to be honest with you, I had a couple of friends who were quite big in IT in different sectors, namely the education sector. And this gentleman had literally, he was in fatigue all the time. He was always exhausted. He was never, one of his failings was he was never able to say no, but he also would have these bouts where he would totally collapse and he would be out for a weekend, 4 or 5 days, because he just couldn't keep up with the load of work. Is that the type of thing you've come across before you decided to teach people how to manage their time?
I mean, I myself, I ended up having a stroke as a result of improper management of time, pushing myself too hard all the time. It's quite an unforgiving industry. So
because it doesn't see you, it sees times and snags, and you're just a person behind a project management system, aren't you?
And it, as a result, generally people's lifespan, so to speak, within the industry tends to be quite short, and the quality of the work then gets affected as well, because at the beginning people push really hard and it's really good and it's wonderful, but as they gain more experience in most industries, the more experienced you are, the better your work is. But in that particular industry, the more experienced you are, the less able you are to keep up with it, because people expect more and more and more of you.
There's an unlimited, that's it. There you are. It's a bit like they're expecting you to upgrade yourself. Put in a faster processor or something. I think the way they look at you, and I think this is natural, because in a certain industry, I know a couple of friends, we're from Asian backgrounds, so I've got a couple of friends who are in the jewelry game. So they've got, large jewelry retail shops, and they measure everything in the millis. So they'll actually account for every penny in the invoice, whereas normally you find someone else in a different industry, like food, and restaurants and, food and beverage. They sort of round everything off to the pound, not really worried about the penny. So I think the nature of the business cuts the cloth of the individual. So what do you say to this saying then? I mean, the saying is, you basically put in the extra effort, talking about being exhausted. You put the extra effort in to offset any failures or weaknesses in your abilities. Talking about where you're coming from, where does that resonate with you? Where does it come in, that saying? Is it, top down, where does it go?
On the confidence end of that, as Lakhi pointed out, confidence is relative, but it's not just like your experience and how efficient you can be and so on and so forth. It's also how energetic you are and how much of you can put into something. And I do think there reaches a point where when it comes to applying hard work, obviously application of hard work is always required. But it does reach a point where if you push too hard, it can end up detracting from that confidence, because your energy levels become so depleted so quickly that you then obviously have the added element of, can I sustain this, which then detracts from your confidence, and that becomes an issue as well. But I think there's a fine line. If you can put in hard work, lots of hard work, but at a sustainable level, then yes, absolutely, it will offset a lack of confidence and help you build that confidence. But if
I think I agree. So the point is sustainable. Sustainable normally comes from consistency and being persistent and being consistent, I think, and measuring, taking small measures within your, allocating time, which is what your specialty is, allocating a certain number of hours a day and sticking to the program. What do you, Lakhi's from an IT background, as he was in Department of Trade and Industry with Patricia Hubert. Probably a bit of, in those days, he was probably a bit of an eye candy for all the older ladies. So he was, he was setting up software websites and software systems for international taxation. Is that right, Lakhi Singh? How did you file? Were you working hard to offset your confidence? Did it burn you out?
I had a very similar experience with Michael, so that's why I decided to get into business, because I found that every time I won a contract, you get paid maybe twice as much, but expecting 10 times more.
Wow.
They're almost like, in order to keep up, you need to be working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And even
Ridiculous.
then, you could be only 10% in sometimes in certain projects. Because I think they're not called projects anymore. When they get to that stage, they start becoming called programs. And then if you've got about 400 contracts that need to be completed within 2 weeks across multiple projects with multiple teams with about 100 people in them.
Wow.
After a while, I think you think, okay, is it really worth it? So I think, and then you can also lose confidence, thinking, is it you or is it the projects themselves? So I think got the T-shirt, being a project manager for 20 years. So it's quite a tough job actually, being a project manager, and then moving on to program managers is even tougher. And it's highly political as well. So there's about 10 or 20 different dimensions. You've got all these different boards that you've got to report to, and then you've got stakeholders to manage.
Okay, we can hear you. I think you're breaking up, Lakhi. You're probably in a part of the garden that's got bad reception. You need to keep moving, making moves, Lakhi Singh.
There we go. Is that better?
Okay, that's better now. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so that's the saying of the week. So, working hard. And I think it resonates with Michael, because that's probably one of the things he does. He tries to help people calm down and take, steps rather than burning themselves out. Most of your clients, Michael, are they IT people? Are they executives? Are they just school children who keep falling over because they're getting excited because it's lunchtime? What type of clients do you have?
Well, they come from a range of different industries, but they tend to be people that have been doing it a while. So from a financial standpoint, they're reasonably successful, but they've gained that success by, working every hour under the sun and not resting and so on. So they need some help to shift out of that mindset so that they can step back a bit and let their team take on more responsibility so that they can step out of it. But as I say, they tend to come from a variety of different industries. I've worked with quite a few people in the IT industry because I've got lots of connections within the industry. But I've worked with a few landlords as well.
Wow, okay,
That's
very diverse.
and I've also worked with people in the financial sector, people that are in the health and beauty industry as well, and in the food service industry as well. So there's been quite a
So
mix.
it's an illness, you could say, or it's a commonality. I think it stems around people, and I mean, what I found is it's an element of people who have that strand of responsibility in them. When responsibility gets displaced in being over pedantic, so never quite being satisfied that somebody else can do the job they can, and not knowing and not learning how to decentralize. Is that right, Michael, or do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's an element of see, to build their business to that point, they've taken on that responsibility and they've worked really hard. But they've got it to a point where they've brought extra people in, they've built up a team around them, but they've not quite got in the right mindset to hand over that responsibility to the team. So
yeah, nobody can do it as good as I can.
Yeah. And then they become the bottleneck as well. They prevent further growth within their business.
Excellent.
And
that resonates across. I think that reminds me of a few people I know. So talking, okay, so have you got an interest, Michael, in the property sector? Are you flutter with properties?
Well, I don't have any properties myself, but as I say, I've worked with people within the industry, landlords specifically. They tend to get quite overwhelmed once they've got, sort of 10 plus properties. They then become quite overwhelmed with managing them. There's a lot of points of contact with a lot of different people that they have to deal with all the time. There's a lot of contractual obligations with the lenders and so on and so forth. So everything becomes overwhelming for them. And they, as I say, they bring people in to help them with those things, but then they don't let them help, So that's what I help
do
them
the work
with. Yeah, is so they can let go and actually hand that responsibility over.
Does it work? Does your program work?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I'm saying as a person who's delivering the program, I'm sure you start seeing the benefit and you start seeing the energy levels go up in these people when they realize they've got more time to play with than they thought they had. Is that right?
Yeah. And also their team gets a boost, an uplift, as it were, because when you have a team and you give them the responsibility that they're actually there to fulfill, when you actually finally give them that responsibility, the collective IQ of that team tends to skyrocket as well, because that gives them the confidence, because then they know that actually you do believe in them as a member of their team. And
wow, excellent. Right, okay, Lakhi Singh, you're a man, mover and a shaker of the property world. So the topic today is, can you really become a millionaire by purchasing properties from a LPA receiver? So I asked 3 or 4 important questions. What are LPA? What is an LPA receiver? That's the first question. So people need to know, why would you become a millionaire by dealing with LPA receivers and buying properties from LPA? Why not just buy it from a local estate agent? Why from an LPA receiver, first of all? So what is an LPA receiver, Lakhi Singh?
So LPA stands for Landlord Property Act, 1925.
So it's not the law. You're saying it's changed from the Law Property Act to the Landlord Property Act, which is good. It's progress. Okay.
So it is the Law Property Act.
Let's change back to the law, right? Okay, that was quick. So it's become the Law Property Act 1925, yes?
That's right. So, so basically, anybody that's got a property that's commercial or unregulated, let's just say they're not living in it as their personal home. Most contracts that are signed with unregulated loans, well, all the contracts that are signed with a condition in place, which is that if certain obligations aren't met by the borrower, then the lender bank has the rights to appoint receivers based upon this
Wow.
act, collect rent, and have the power of sale. So
Ooh,
that's the crux
that's a
of it.
bit draconian. That's quite draconian, isn't it? Okay, do they have to go to court to be able to
Well, this is it.
sell it?
This is the anomaly. They don't have to go to court, and the conditions can be very nominal for them to, put receivers out. It could just be one missed payment. Not normally a default, but typically, on average, if a borrower has missed at least 2 or 3 payments, depending on the lender, and the lender, especially in cases where it's bridging or private lenders are involved, then they would usually go in with stealth because they're worried about losing their ability to collect the mortgage interest or the bridge interest every month. So that's pretty much what it is.
Okay, that's going to be quite stressful for people. I'm going to ask Michael. Michael, have you come across any of your clients that are actually, you said there's lots of different parties that have to deal with, like the lenders and then tenants and then regulation and then, contractual obligations, X, Y, Z. Have you found any of your clients are being subject to this type of proposition of an LPA receiver being appointed by the bank, or they're finding it difficult to manage the money and pay the mortgages, or they've got lots of repairs on their properties? Have you come across any of that? And what have you suggested for that?
Well, so for a lot of them, it tends to be that I've dealt with anyway. It tends to be where they've rushed the early part of the process. So they've got the deal in place to get the money from the lender, and they get their solicitor to look over the contract. And instead of sitting down with the solicitor and saying, right, now take me through it, step by step, word for word, they say, is there anything I need to look out for? The solicitor will say no. So the solicitor will look at that from the legal standpoint of, can we get the deal done? Not what's going to happen if you're struggling later on, but can we get the deal done, generally? And so the solicitor will then say, no, there's nothing you need to look out for. So they go charging ahead, and then, obviously we've had COVID and whatnot, so there's been issues come up for everybody, basically, that couldn't possibly have been foreseen, that have meant that people have then missed payments and so on. And then an LPA receiver gets appointed, and they're the person on the receiving end of that money in the first place, the borrower, that's the word I was looking for, they panic. And rightly so, it seems like it's come out of nowhere, like, I didn't know this could happen and whatnot, but it is in the contract. It is.
Wow, so you've got a lot of knowledge on Michael, you seem to be quite aware of the Law Property Act. That's very interesting. I think you've got an ability to conceptualize different businesses quite quickly. That's the feeling I get. You're quick to pick up on different business models and the nuances. That is quite interesting. Well, the good thing that you will know that Lakhi Singh happens to be one of the leading solution providers for LPA receivers. So they actually know every trick in the book. Is that right, Lakhi Singh? And how to actually deal with LPA receivers and actually help clients out of that stress. Is that right, Lakhi Singh?
Yep. So we are most dynamic and most depth knowledge, even more so than barristers in this particular field, because we've got on the ground experience in terms of dealing with this act practically. So we've, over the last 15 years, we've probably seen nearly every eventuality, from properties being sold in auction and us having to turn up 24 hours before, negotiate and get the property back, to the whole, all the locks being changed, security being appointed, and then us still being able to oust the receivers, to where banks have literally got something in the contract, got something that's in the contract that's not there, that they're saying is in there, and using that as a way of forcing the receivers onto the property.
Wow, that's very, I mean, that's like, that can be regarded as abuse of position. Isn't that what it falls into, Lakhi Singh?
That's right. So I think one of our major concerns, the reason we're putting the LPA receivers out as a topic, is it's actually nobody's, I think any landlord, I think Michael probably realizes this, is that any landlord out there, they don't realize what's really out there in terms of assistance or help, because it's a little known area, and the more it's talked about, the more it's understood, more potential there is that anybody who's caught off guard by this little known area of legislation is that more likely.
Well, it's an act, Lakhi, isn't it? It's,
Yeah.
you know, it's an act or legislation that's been created more than 100 years, just under 100 years now. I think it's 96 years old, isn't it, Lakhi? 1925.
And our understanding is that it's actually going to get a lot worse by February this year. Might actually see the most properties ever actually taken over by LPA receivers in the last 20 years.
Okay, Michael. Okay, so which I'm going to combine both the topics because I think it's interesting. So how do you assist landlords who are in that stress then? Because obviously either you've got to have intimate knowledge of the Law Property Act, in particular the laws surrounding the appointment and the powers conferred upon an LPA receiver, or you're helping them psychologically, mentally, trying to calm them down. What's the technique you're using to manage your clients who are actually in this predicament, and they've all of a sudden come across something that they've never heard of before? Because I'm sure that's the case in 99.9% of property landlords. They've never come across the Law Property Act clause, even though it's found in your normal residential mortgages as well. So even in normal residential mortgages, you'll find the clause that relates to that, whether it is enacted in a residential mortgage or not, it's a separate topic, but it is definitely found in there. And it's literally the same contract that has been taken across to commercial assets as well. So the question is to you, Michael, tell us, what do you do? Do you give them technical advice? Do you give them moral advice? Do you calm them down? Do you, give them a few tips on how to, relax by performing yoga moves or something? What do you do?
Well, I get them to just tell me, generally just blurt everything out, like as they see it right there in the moment. because then we can help separate the emotional component, because that's a big issue, the emotional component, and it blurs the lines of everything as well. So no one can really think straight when they think they've got the problem, then they've got how they feel about it. So we can separate the two.
Yeah.
So then we can see the problem itself. And then generally we have a chat about their process, about what they went through in the first place to get that deal done. And then that usually leads back to advising them to go back to their solicitor to get their solicitor. And they do generally have to pay a fee for it, but it's, you know, better late than never. But they get their solicitor then to go through the contract and explain it in layman's terms, word for word, every aspect of that contract, rather than just saying, is there anything you need to look out for? That then gives them a better understanding of what they're getting into, and then the solicitor generally advises what.
Well, isn't that a bit of a
catch-22?
Well, I'm gonna take that topic over to Lakhi, because them being the expert, it's good that you, Michael, realize that it does fall into the remit or the domain of the solicitors. But the funny thing is, I've never seen a solicitor, a conveyance solicitor, who's actually sat down with the potential borrower and explained to them, like Michael said, every major part of that contract and the risks in the contract, in particular the Law Property Act. Why is that not done, Lakhi? Is there a reason, or is it just that the solicitors don't care? They're not, because they are acting for the borrower. But we know in the SRA rules, so that the SRA rules, for anybody who doesn't understand, are the Law Society regulatory rules that a solicitor has to abide by as being a registered solicitor. And one of the clauses, hypocritical clause you could call it, in that regulation is that the responsibility or the ultimate responsibility lies with the lender client. So what this basically saying to all the solicitors are, well, you're working, you're getting employed by Michael. Michael's asked you to do his conveyancing, but you're actually ultimately responsible to the lender, not to Michael. So you need to face the lender, but work for Michael. Is that correct, Lakhi? Am I right in understanding that?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And my main issue is that I think the reason that the solicitors are very much not looking into the technicalities of all these problems that could be is that for them, you know, it's too much time and trouble, because they just make on one transaction, let's just say they charge £500, and the amount of time and effort that it takes to be able to deal with a transaction is quite humongous in terms of the profit that they're going to make.
So I don't think they charge 500 quid, mate. I think they charge around a couple of £1,000.
It depends on the size of the transaction, but let's just say it's £500 as an example. But for them, the amount of time and effort they're going to take to try and deal with all those things, this is just like one minor component for them. So they don't probably even see it as anything, because it's not something that's there in front of them that's going to be an issue for them to deal with at a later date. So technically they can, just like anything, when you produce sausage meat, there's a risk that it might get infected. So you probably, as a manufacturer, might put a little warranty on there, like, we're not responsible if you don't heat up the food properly. So in the same way, they put they're giving you all the contracts, you haven't read them, and there's about 20, 30 different clauses, that's just one of them. Then, for the moment, they're just focusing on one. Yeah, if you miss your payment, then you're going to have problems. That's as much as they say, in a bit more detail than that. So before you sign contracts, and they say, are you aware that, if you miss your payments, that you could lose your home? So I think that's as much as is said, but they don't really talk about how it could happen or why it could happen, that's going to be a lengthy conversation. They don't really want to put time and effort in on their books or their staff to actually, I think more from a cost point of view, they're not really going to do that.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, let's go. Let's come back to Michael. Michael, you're seeing this you're seeing this happen, and you're getting clients who are stressed. I mean, what's the normal reaction? I mean, I now understand what you're talking about. It's a bit like a catch-22 situation. The same solicitor that hasn't warned their client before taking the mortgage out, the same solicitor is being sent, is sitting down with the client and telling them about the Law Property Act, possibly belatedly. It doesn't really help the client then. What it does do is it carves out a bit more money for them, doesn't it? A bit more work. What do you say to that, Michael?
Yeah, so they do charge for it. And if you are at the beginning of the process, when you're actually getting that contract in place between you and the lender in the first place, you can, at that point, request that consultation then. And when you put that money in front of them, they'll say, yes, absolutely, I'll do that with you. But you have to obviously have the foresight to make that request in the first place. So when it happens after the fact, as it normally does, they obviously they're charged for that consultation. They go through the contract or the relevant parts of that contract with the client to lay it all out for them. I think it's a bit devious on their part, but they also don't do anything that doesn't breach their regulations and rules. They work within the.
Isn't it okay? So let's play that out. You've got a solicitor. He's here to do the conveyancing for you. He has a right. Now, it's a funny thing because there's an area of contract law that is overlapping with this. The contract law that says that every contract should be fair and equitable. Now, a conveyancing solicitor technically is responsible for the contracts between the mortgagor and the mortgagee. He's responsible for the process, money laundering, XYZ. Now, isn't it a bit, it's a bit more than devious. It's, isn't it negligent that the solicitors who are acting for the mortgagors fail to tell them about this very draconian law, actually fail to give, I mean, it's even, okay, let's keep it even broader than that, not just the property, not just the LPA receiver clause, but the fact they don't mention to their clients that they seem to feel or they have a feeling that the contracts are not fair or equitable. They're biased towards the banks. What do you say to that? First, I want to ask Lakhi because he's, they deal with this. What do you think is a solution to that, Lakhi? Because if you go to a solicitor and say, please tell me, tell me the key clauses in this contract. What do I have to be afraid of or worried of? And you say, oh well, if you miss your payments, they'll take your underpants. If you keep the property in a bad state of repair, they'll take your socks. X, Y. They keep you all the negative bits in terms of you need to be aware that you can financially afford this. X, Y, Z.
Okay, I'll give you a simple analogy.
How do they tell the client the contract is not fair? It's not equitable.
I'll give you a simple analogy. If you're, let's just say, a car sales company, retail, and selling, and you're, let's just say, you produce diesel and petrol cars, you're hardly going to be going to people to say, go and buy electric cars because you're going to be losing business. That's a sort of not the perfect analogy, but so because it's more fuel efficient, it's maybe cheaper, there's lots of benefits, but you're not going to be if you're already supplying petrol cars and your bread and butter is based upon who feeds you, then why would you actually be telling people more than they need to know? So that's the issue.
Okay.
So
Okay. Let's take that. Let's take that statement. Take it across to Stephen. Stephen, you don't have a position in front of the bank. You're not going to be able to renegotiate the whole contract. No, I don't like that clause. That clause too aggressive. That's not fair. That's not equitable. It's not going to happen, is it? Because the banks are just going to turn around and say, on your bike. There's plenty of people out there who are going to be quite happy to buy this property on our terms. Isn't that right?
Well, I think from the bank's perspective, and also the perspective of the solicitors as well, if you're getting into property, then you are expected to do some element of due diligence and actually, do some research into the laws and regulations around it. While in theory, when you put it like that, that seems reasonable and fair. The laws and regulations are quite, they're quite in depth, and they're also quite scattered across various different, aspects of law and whatnot. So it becomes difficult to actually find all that information in one go and get all that information. So in practice, it becomes quite unwieldy and impractical. But the vast majority of the time, it doesn't go that way. It doesn't end up on the negative side of things. So the vast majority of property investors and whatnot don't ever end up in that situation, so they don't have that information themselves. So when you look at training for property investors and developers and landlords and so on, it's from other investors and landlords and whatnot. So if they've never experienced it, then they can't teach this is what you need to look out for. So people then go and get that training, and they get told that this is what you need to look for and so on, and that's not included. And then they end up obviously with a situation like COVID, for example, comes along, and tenants can't pay their bills, so they can't pay their bill, and it snowballs, and then they end up with the insolvency people coming in to take their property and whatnot, and then it's completely unexpected, and it's not like, morally it is ambiguous to say the least, but from a legal perspective, it is the law can say, the banks can say, and the solicitors can say, well, you should have done your research in the first place, to the person that's got that loan, that investment from the bank. And they, as is quite often the case in the world, they just pass the buck. And obviously, as the person, the payee of that loan, the buck stops with you. You're the end of that line. Yeah. So
Okay.
you end up being the end of that line, and it's not
let's
ideal.
Let's take that snippet. The receiver's coming. Now let's look at the next bit of the topic. The topic is about how to become on the other side of the fence now. I'm saying, how do you acquire properties from an LPA receiver? Lakhi, tell me, is there some special technique in acquiring assets from an LPA? So he's taking control of the property. Is he able to sell the property that you can buy it from? Does he have the authority to do that, Lakhi?
So basically, once receivers send out letters and change the locks and start collecting the rent themselves and have the power of sale, then tech pretty much can do anything with the property they want. They can put it into auction, they can put it out there.
Wow. Very draconian. Very draconian. I mean, from a place where you expect due diligence, you expect due process, you expect fairness in contract, or fairness in the terms, or a position for everybody, the right for everybody, individual, to defend himself. You know, that's the basic. Was it the basic constitute of the law of what's it now? What was it called? Constitutional law. The right, habeas corpus, is that what it is? The right for everybody to defend themselves. So in that, it's very draconian. So how are you going to deal? How are you going to deal with an LPA? How are you going to buy properties off an LPA receiver? We're going to have an itch, feeling that this topic is going to need more time. But tell me, to start the topic, how do you and what do you do? What is an LPA? Is it like some this somewhat heavenly person that floats around with a wand and a sword and allows people to purchase properties if he touches them on their shoulder with his sword? Or is it something which is more basic than that, Lakhi?
So receivers typically tend to be surveyors, solicitors, estate agents, or insolvency practices. And there are some set protocols in terms of they're going to put it out to the market and leave it out for a certain time and do certain things. But those protocols are not necessarily set in stone. And if anybody is looking to buy properties from receivers, a lot of it is anybody who buys in bulk, buying 10 or 20 units per month or something, then they tend to know all the receivers, and the receivers come to them first and say, look, got these 2 properties, we need to get rid of, because the receivers are also have an interest because they get paid a fee for actually doing some of the basics, and they'll also get a fee on the transaction of the sale. And if the receivers, if they are estate agents or they are somewhat, let's just say, quite a small organization, they may not follow all the rules, and they may be prone to breaking the process and selling properties onto, let's say, bulk buyers. So the vendor or the owner of the property is not going to receive what he was expecting, because they just need to get rid of the debt that the bank has. They're not worried about the profitability of the person that's got the property. That's one point.
I think that is one of the key points that probably frustrates lots of mortgagors. So I'm going to ask Michael. Michael, you've got clients who have been faced by LPA receivers. Has there ever been a good outcome to that situation where the LPA receivers have turned around and handed the keys back, apologized and said, there you are, sir, we apologize. There's the keys of your properties back. Forgive us. Can we do anything to reconcile our gift? Does that happen?
Well, I don't think that apologising is really in their nature, but there has been instances of the properties going back, but it tends to be through like renegotiation, which is always heavily in favour of the lender, always.
Wow.
So, well, in the experience I've had anyway, so it's heavily in favour of the lender. But if the person that actually wants to get that property back in the first place can do it, because the issues that cause it to go to the LPA in the first place tend to be temporary. Like they've had some issues with their tenants, and then, but they get back on track, so they can then meet the terms of the renegotiation. Then they get the property back, but it becomes it adds a fear factor, I guess, to the process. So that person then, that property developer or whatever, then puts a great deal of time, money and effort into learning every aspect of the process and of the contracts and so on, so they can obviously prevent that from happening again.
Isn't that going to be someone who's literally going to be sleeping with one eye open, always afraid that something's going to happen that's going to, put his properties back into some receivership or whatever. Is it really the fact that once they lose control, and I agree that the position is probably going to be heavily in favor of the lender, but giving the properties back, and as you said, they renegotiate the terms, is that the same as having a payment arrangement if it's because of the missed payments? Or is it just don't be a naughty boy, pay us our 100,000 arrears back, and promise you never to do it again? How does it work? How much do you know from your clients of the intricate details of how it works?
From what I've seen, the renegotiation tends to obviously cover the debt itself, but the fees of the LPA, the fees of the intermediaries between them and the lender, and the fees of the lender as well, they put on it, interest fees and that sort of thing.
Wow.
So that all has to be negotiated in, so it becomes expensive, and it obviously, for the person buying the property, it becomes restrictive in terms of their profitability from that particular property.
Well, it basically eats into the equity, doesn't it? All that rubbish eats into the equity. Well, Lakhi Singh, we've got the last, I think, how long have we got? 3 minutes, sir? I want to ask you now, give me your summary of this, because working hard or putting the extra effort in to offset your inabilities or your weaknesses, can we combine that up with the appointment with the LPA? How do you work extra hard to disinstruct an LPA? Can you do that? Can you start tap dancing outside of the property and the LPA receives that, there you are, sir, an excellent tap dancer, take your property keys back? Can that work?
I think the main point here is that prevention is better than cure, because once you are in a headlock with the receivers, then the chances of you coming out with your properties intact back the same way is a very low percentile. So I think the key factors are here that if anybody's buying properties, they need to be a lot more prudent in their cash flows and check out the conditions. So if they break any conditions, they've just got to maybe do some research on the internet to say what are the most broken parts of a contract that occur where properties could be taken over. And then Michael and I are both from project management backgrounds, so if they want to do it on a sort of very boring, dull project basis, they just have to write down their risks into their project, and then as anything comes up that's actually likely to hit that risk issue, then they've got to put it into the risk log, and that's going to more likely to prompt them to actually look at preventative action in terms of what they need to put into place. It could be, they lose their home, they're going to live in that property, and they live in there, but they don't tell the mortgage company, and the mortgage company finds out. That's a risk. That's quite a major one. I've seen quite a few times. Another one is that you go into arrears, you put your head in the sand, you don't talk to the bank, and even if you talk to the bank, the more you talk to them, the more likely that they're going to appoint receivers, because if you tell them too much, then they could appoint receivers, or tell them too little, they could appoint receivers. So it's very different with each lender.
Yeah, so I think the point you're making, Lakhi, is the more communication, the more transparency sometimes, and the more openness leads to the bank trying to drill in all of your personal information and assets and anything else that they can get their hands on to offset any losses they may think they're going to suffer. Is that right, Lakhi? Is that the point you're trying to make?
So I think a lot of landlords are completely unaware that in some ways complete disclosure is almost giving the bank the ability to attack you as and when they want to, because they know.
Okay, so let's get it to Michael now. Your last words, Michael. I mean, you seem to have a very vivid or a very clear understanding of how the LPA receivers behave and how it could probably affect your clients, etc. So, any last words then on this topic? LPA receivers, should they come to you for advice? Should they try and come? If we have people listening, we're going to have LPA receivers, trouble. They've got something on the horizon brewing. They've had a letter through the post. Is it a good thing that they should talk to you, Michael, and get some basic, advice as to how to handle themselves and prepare themselves?
I mean, yes. If they're having trouble coping with it all, and they haven't got that clear vision of, right, this is what I need to do, and so on, and they need someone to help pull out the emotional component, then that's
your bit.
That's my bit, so that they can then get a clear view of the problem itself. But the actual problem is much more of a legal issue. So that in itself to be dealt with.
For that, you've got Lakhi Singh, the property fixer,
Absolutely.
because they are the leading experts in the Law Property Act, and they do have quite a few number of tricks in their magic box. So they are quite good at dealing with LPA receivers and getting them disinstructed. So unfortunately, I think we've run out of time today, so we're going to close off. We'll say thank you to Michael and thank you to Lakhi Singh as well. Always, and we'll have you back again. I think there's a lot. I find an excellent energy from you. I think there's a lot of support and advice that you probably could have for lots of clients that do come through the doors with Lakhi Singh. And we'll say goodbye for today. See you on Friday, the Drive Time Live with the Lakhi Singh, the property fixer. See you on Friday, 8 a.m.